There is a parenting myth so widespread that most people have never even questioned it. The myth goes like this: the more involved you are in your teenager's life, the better your relationship will be. More guidance, more structure, more correction, more presence. And yet, some of the most connected, emotionally secure teenagers in the world are raised by parents who do something that looks, from the outside, almost like stepping back. Denmark consistently ranks among the world's happiest countries, and Danish children and adolescents also tend to score highly on measures of well-being in international comparisons. Stay with this, because what you are about to understand will not just change how you see Danish parenting, it will change how you see your own teenager. Most parents look at a teen who seems distant and think, I need to get closer. A teen who seems irresponsible and think, I need to supervise more. A teen who seems overconfident and think, I need to pull them back down. And a teen who seems too quiet and think, I need to push them to open up. Danish parents often do the opposite, and they are not guessing. They are operating from a completely different understanding of what teenagers actually need to grow. Here are 8 things they understand that most parents in other countries are still trying to figure out. The first is this: many Danish parents tend to extend trust earlier than parents in many other cultures. In most households, trust is a reward system. The teen proves they can be trusted, and then the parent grants more freedom. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, but here is the problem. It puts the teenager in a permanent audition. They are always performing for approval, always waiting to be evaluated. And a teenager who is always being evaluated never fully relaxes into who they are. They start managing your perception of them instead of actually developing judgment. Danish parents flip this completely. They extend trust first before it is proven, not because they are naive, but because they understand something important about how trust actually works in a developing brain. When a teenager feels trusted, they begin to internalize that trust as part of their identity. They are more likely to begin seeing themselves as capable of acting responsibly. And identity-level beliefs change behavior far more reliably than rules ever will. The mistake most parents make is treating freedom as a reward for good behavior. The more powerful move is treating it as an investment in who your teenager is becoming. Notice the pattern that's already emerging. None of these ideas are really about giving teenagers more freedom. They're about helping them develop better judgment, stronger identity, and greater emotional security. The second lesson is less obvious, but it may be one of the most important. Danish parents are deeply uncomfortable with comparison, not just discouraging it in their kids, but actively not doing it themselves. They do not reward a child for being the best in the class. They do not stack their teenager's performance against someone else's. Achievement is celebrated, but superiority is not the goal. This connects to a cultural idea called janteloven, which roughly translates to do not think you are better than others. On the surface, that sounds like it might crush confidence or ambition. It does not. What it actually does is redirect the motivation. When teenagers are not competing for rank, they start competing against themselves. They chase personal growth instead of social status. And here is what that does neurologically. It keeps the reward system attached to genuine mastery instead of social comparison. Teenagers raised this way tend to have more stable self-esteem because their sense of worth is not constantly at the mercy of how they stack up against their peers. If you have a teenager who seems obsessed with being better than everyone else, constantly checking their status, constantly anxious about falling behind, it is worth asking whether the metrics they are using came from home. The third lesson is one that most parents in high-pressure cultures find genuinely difficult. Danish parents are not afraid of boredom. They do not fill every gap. They do not rescue their teenager from unscheduled time or the discomfort of not having a plan. There is a window in adolescent brain development, roughly between 13 and 18, when the prefrontal cortex is still building its capacity for self-direction. During that window, one of the most valuable experiences for developing executive function is having regular opportunities to manage unstructured time and decide what to do without someone constantly directing the next step. Not because they will always choose wisely, but because the act of choosing, initiating, and following through on something they decided for themselves is how those executive function skills gradually strengthen through repeated practice. A teenager who is always scheduled, always guided, always given the next step, never gets to complete that wiring. They reach adulthood with a brain that is waiting to be directed, because that is what their development was shaped around. This does not mean ignoring your teen or pretending structure has no value. It means leaving space, intentional, deliberate space where the next move belongs to them. The fourth lesson goes right to the heart of how Danish families communicate. There is a moment that I think many parents recognize. Your teenager says something blunt, maybe even something that lands a little too directly. And your instinct is to correct it, to smooth it over, to teach them a more socially careful way of saying it. But Danish parents often do the opposite. They treat directness as a value worth protecting. In many Danish households, children are encouraged from an early age to say what they actually mean, not to dress up their feelings in excessive politeness or to hint at what they want and wait to be understood. Honest, direct communication is taught as a form of respect, not as rudeness. Here is why this matters for your teenager. When teens are trained to be indirect, when they learn that the direct truth might not be welcome, they start editing themselves, not just in what they say to you, but in what they allow themselves to feel. Over time, some teenagers become so focused on managing other people's reactions that they spend less time paying attention to their own thoughts and feelings. They become skilled at navigating other people's emotions while finding it harder to recognize their own. The parent who can receive directness without defensiveness sends a powerful signal. Your real thoughts are safe here. And a teenager who believes their real thoughts are safe at home will keep coming home. The fifth lesson is the one with the longest reach. Danish parents raise their children with a strong sense of equality. Not equality in the sense of outcomes or fairness as a talking point, but a deeply embodied sense that no person's basic worth is determined by their job, income, or status. Children grow up watching their parents treat a delivery driver the same way they treat a colleague or a doctor. On the surface, this looks like a lesson about values, but something much deeper is happening underneath. A teenager who has never been taught to rank people by status walks into the world with a fundamentally different relationship to authority. They are not intimidated by people who have power, because they have not been raised to see power as the measure of a person. They can sit across from a teacher, a coach, an interviewer, and speak clearly because they see themselves as fundamentally equal in worth, even if not equal in experience or position. This is not arrogance. It is the quiet confidence of someone who was never taught to make themselves small in front of a title. The sixth lesson is where a lot of parents feel the most conflict. When a teenager makes a mistake, the typical response is correction. Danish parents are more likely to respond with curiosity. What happened? What were you thinking? What would you do differently? This is not passive. It is not permissive. It is a strategic choice based on how accountability actually develops in an adolescent brain. Here is the mechanism. When a parent immediately jumps to correction, a teenager's nervous system often shifts into a defensive state. Instead of reflecting on the mistake, much of their attention becomes focused on managing the parent's reaction. The lesson does not land because there is no room for it to. When a parent responds with genuine curiosity first, the teenager's nervous system stays open. They stay in the part of their brain that can reflect, analyze, and learn. The accountability is not handed to them from outside. It builds from inside, which is the only kind that actually sticks. The mistake is thinking that correction produces responsibility, What actually produces responsibility is a teenager who learns to hold themselves accountable. And that process begins with a parent who makes space for reflection before judgment. The seventh lesson is the one that never makes it into parenting books, but it might be the most important one. Danish parents tend to prioritize time that is unproductive by design. Family dinners with no agenda, evenings at home with nothing planned, weekends without a goal. This is called hygge, which is often translated as coziness, but the real meaning is closer to intentional togetherness. Ordinary time, made sacred by the decision to be present in it. Here is what that does for a teenager. Strong attachment usually isn't built through milestone moments alone. It's built through countless ordinary interactions over time. A teenager's sense of emotional security is not built in the big conversations or the serious talks. It is built in the quiet Tuesday evenings where nothing happens and nobody is trying to accomplish anything. That is the texture of safety. And it is where trust lives between the moments that test it. If your teenager seems unreachable during the important conversations, it may be because the ordinary time has been quietly disappearing. Not because anyone intended it to, but because life filled in all the gaps. The eighth lesson brings everything together. Danish parents raise children to cooperate before they compete. In school, in teams, in families, the emphasis is on what we can build together, rather than who comes out ahead. This is not idealism. It is a practical understanding of how teenagers develop resilience. A teenager who has only ever been in competition develops a nervous system that experiences others as threats. Every social situation becomes a rank calculation. Every failure feels existential. Every success has to be defended. A teenager who has been raised in a culture of cooperation develops a fundamentally different orientation. Other people become resources, not rivals. Asking for help does not feel like weakness. Sharing credit does not feel like loss. And when things go wrong, their first instinct is to figure it out together rather than collapse alone. Research consistently suggests that teenagers who develop strong cooperative skills and supportive relationships tend to experience better long-term well-being, healthier relationships, and lower levels of psychological distress. The shift from competition to cooperation is more than a change in values. Over time, it can also shape how teenagers experience relationships, stress, and support. So here's where this all lands. Think about a moment you have had recently where your teenager seemed distant, irresponsible, difficult, closed off. Think about the version of you that walked into that moment and what that version was trying to solve. Now, think about what would have been different if you had walked in knowing what you know now, not trying to correct the behavior, not trying to fix the surface, but reading the signal underneath, seeing the closed door not as rejection, but as a test of whether home is safe enough to return to, seeing the mistake not as defiance, but as the nervous system of someone whose judgment is still being built, seeing the bluntness not as rudeness, but as honesty that still trusts you enough to be honest with. Danish parenting is not a technique. It is a translation. It is the ongoing practice of reading what is actually happening in your teenager and responding to that, instead of to the version of them that frustrates you. When you stop seeing your teenager as difficult and start seeing the signal beneath the behavior, something changes. Not just in how they act, in what you are to each other. You stop being the authority they manage and become the person they come back to, the one they trust with the real version of themselves, not the polished one designed to get through the day. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing.